I'm Margie Margolies, and I am interviewing Sam Gingold for the Jewish Museum Milwaukee on March 21st, 2013. We'll start with a little background. If you could tell me the name you were born with and your name today, and if you want to introduce yourself in your native language, which is
Yiddish.
And then in English.
Ja. Mein Name ist Israel Gingold. Ich bin geboren in Warsaw, Poland, in 1934. I'll translate it in English. My name is Israel Gingold, and I was born in Warsaw, Poland, 1934.
And can you tell us how your name came to be Sam?
Sam. Well, Sam was just by coincidence as we landed in New York in Ellis Island. My father knew a person that preceded us come to the United States. And after we went through the inspection and sort of delousing, we had to go through that too. And also the medical we had to pass, because if you had any illness or sickness, you were not allowed to enter, and you might have been sent back right away. So anyway, after we passed, and they start asking the names, there was usually in Ellis Island a number of people that recorded your history or names and date of birth. By the way, that's probably why a lot of people have different names, not by on purpose, purely by accident, and also the accent. As they told that person to write it down, the way they heard it was different than they actually were named initially, and that was some of the confusions. See? But in either case, they wanted an American name, and that person that my dad knew, his name was Sam, so that we'll just put down Sam. So had no other relation other than that.
Was your name Srul for someone? Were you named for someone?
That I don't know, but I assume it was for somebody in the family, you know. And but my Hebrew name, a Jewish name, is Israel. So on my bar mitzvah and everything, it's Israel. The reason it was Srul, because that was one of the ways to not be identified as a Jew in Poland. Other than that, I don't believe it has any significance.
Did your family feel that it was important not to be identified as a Jew?
All Jews in Poland felt that way. At that time, you know, as a child, because when the war started in '39, I was only about 5 years old. So my memory is from a perspective of a 5-year-old kid, and as matured, obviously, I got older, and I probably grew up much, much faster than anybody else.
Do you remember anything of your childhood, your first 5 years before the war?
Well, I knew as a child I could not go out in the street alone, because a couple of times I did, I got beat up. Jews were not welcome any place. Matter of fact, in Poland, very few Jewish people had any major education. It was hard to get into school. Various people, for example, my dad, to the best of my knowledge, finished high school or equivalent, whatever it was, But my mother, because of, did not go to school at all, primarily because of money, and also you were Jewish. It was not easy to get in. So a lot, as you probably check some of them, a lot of people don't know how to read or write. I myself, obviously, I was too young to go to school at that point, so I never had experience in kindergarten or anything else. Matter of fact, my first schooling, sort of formal schooling in class, wasn't until I was 14 years old in Germany after the war. After that point, I had no schooling at all. As far as I mentioned, that most of my memory is probably limited. I can visualize, you know, we lived either on second or third floor. I remember walking up the stairs. You know, it was sort of an apartment building, built sort of a U with a courtyard. And, we lived over there. And of course in '39 everything was turned upside down. Initially we found that we had to run out of the buildings because they were bombing the city in '39, in September.
Who was bombing the city?
German. And I believe they came, sometime in September they came in. I know my mother told me that William, my brother, he was born in September 20th, 1939. And my mother told me that they had, after the birth, they had to all run out of the hospital.
Tell us a little about your family before the war. Who was in your family? And I don't know, did you say the city in English yet?
Yeah, well, Warsaw, Poland. To the best of my recollection, I don't remember any faces of my grandparents. From what I understand is my mother's parents probably died prior to me being born. I remember meeting my dad's father, which is my grandfather, a number of times. And that's about all I can remember of the relatives. Apparently there were not many initially in Warsaw anyway, you know, so there wasn't too many of them.
Do you know any of your grandparents' names?
Well, there was let's see, I'm trying to remember some of them that my parents told me. My dad, my father David, his father was named Norse Nutter, and his mother, I believe, was Sarah. From my mother's side, the only one I can remember is her father, which was Baruch. I don't remember the name of her mother. And there was an uncle and aunt that came frequently to our apartment, and that was on my mother's side. His name was Freuen and Have. I think Freuen was a little older than my mother, and Have was younger than my mother. Those were the only relatives I remember interacting at all. So.
In Warsaw, were you in a Jewish neighborhood?
Yes. I think you almost have to be for self-protection. Because as I said, it wasn't a friendly thing, you know, and so, but I believe we probably were living in a lower income, you know, because we as a child, I don't remember having anything fancy or new. It was all fixed up stuff, as far as toys and broken or made up with wood, you know. So.
Were your parents religious?
Yes, my dad was, well, he practiced, but he wasn't Orthodox. His father, North Newton, from what I found out in a conversation with my parents, that he was heavily involved in the temple, and he was a cantor. Matter of fact, my dad created quite a reputation, because when I introduced myself, some of the people that are older than me, my dad's name, always wanted to know if I'm related to the Gingold, so he knew, you know. And he did a lot of services in Temple Menorah and Anshel Libovich here in Milwaukee.
As a cantor?
As participant, not as an official cantor, but he did a lot of the services, and all the rabbis know him in those two temples. He conducted the services quite often.
So in 1939, you said your mother was in the hospital having your brother William.
Right.
That's when the war broke out.
That's when the German troops came in. At that point, we left the apartment, and we never came back, to the best of my memory, to that place. Whether it was on purpose or whether it was demolished, I don't know the reason for it. Our next experience is we were picked up by German troops, and apparently they started gathering all the Jews to one area, and that's what became the Warsaw Ghetto. Sorry. Well, the Warsaw Ghetto was not exactly on the same streets that we used to live, but it was in a general neighborhood. And I have no idea how many blocks there were, but it was quite large. And we were put in with all kinds of families, you know. They put in as many people as they could, and it was sort of like a roadhouse, as you see. It's about 3 or 4 stories high. And And basically, initially, it wasn't too bad. You know, they supplied food and medication and so on for the children and for the elderly. But as time progressed, it got less and less. And that's why some of the elderly who were ill starting to die out. And I don't recall how long, but from the conversation I had with my parents, briefly, we might have been there about 2 years in the ghetto.
Were your parents working at that time, or did anyone go anywhere? How was it for 2 years?
In the ghetto, you didn't work. They just collected the men and for whatever jobs they needed and brought them back. And sometimes some of them didn't come back. And after a while, it got to a point that you didn't ask what happened because you didn't want to be identified with the same people, whatever had happened. And so there was little going on, but my dad and they had meetings after a while. You know, sort of like bad news travels fast. Even though it wasn't regular communication or mail, from the people that came, because in the ghettos there weren't just the Polish people. You also had people, maybe by mistake, or maybe they were in Poland during that time, but they were from other countries. See? Because I could tell that by their conversation. There was different languages. They could have been from Czechoslovakia, from Hungary, Romania, or any of those countries, or even Germans. We had 2 attempts to escape. There were people, the conversation basically in the ghetto was, you had two fronts, so to speak. And the reason I know that because I went with my dad to some of the meetings, which was supposedly hidden, so they won't know we're having meetings for anything, you know. So usually it was at night or after midnight, in some hall or somebody's basement or whatever. But usually the conversation was talking about what's going on. So I found the elderly, which I consider the elderly at that time probably over 30, and the younger ones were sort of my dad's age, which was in the mid-20s or late 20s at that time. So I consider the younger group. The older group didn't want to create any waves, so to speak, in other words, create any problems. And the constant conversation was, well, it's not going to get any worse. Well, it did. The younger people didn't want to believe that, and they always had an argument, we've got to get out of here before it gets worse. In other words, because every time there was less food, less services, and more control, and also people were beginning to disappear, and also people were dying on the street. A couple of times by that time I probably might have been 6 or 7. There was a couple of times I was sort of volunteered to pick up the bodies on the streets that died. Put them on the cart. Sorry. In either case, we made 2 attempts. My dad and some other younger people, so to speak, and families that are willing to take the risk. The first one was unsuccessful because some of them got shot and we were able to run back. And that was done through the sewer. The second attempt was successful, and it was done through, I believe, some of the younger people that might have been involved in that probably dug the hole, went through one building and went across underneath a street to come out to the cemetery on the other side. And we were able to get out of there. After that, it was strictly hiding out, not being detected in the woods and the farms and so forth. And the object was at that time to get to the Russian border. Russia was not very far away. And eventually, after many nights and in the woods and farms, we had some farmers that helped us, some that didn't, to give us some food or at least not turn us in. That was the help that I'm talking about. And eventually we got to the Russian border, and we had to do some talking for them to let us go across the border, to let them come in. Anyway, we did get in, and the next thing we knew, by the way, with our immediate family, my aunt and uncle was with us at that time also, because the rest of the family didn't want to leave. They said it's just going to be over, it's not going to be a big deal. Unfortunately, and that happened to all our families. When we got to the Russian side, the next thing we knew is we were put on trains, so the cattle trains, and we were not told where we were going. I think the objective was for the Russian army is to move all the civilians away so they can tell who's who. I don't know, And anyway, eventually, after so many days, I don't remember how many days, we wound up in Siberia. Whether that's by design or by mistake, you never know. To the best of my knowledge, we stayed there probably a year and a half. There were 2 winters, I remember. So, and after that, we were released, just our family. I don't know if it was a program or they realized there was a mistake because there weren't too many families. There were usually individuals. So I suspect somebody finally said, "What is we got family?" Because there was another family with 2 kids. So the problem is that they don't belong here. We don't need to take care of kids here. Because it was strictly a labor camp, and what my parents were working is cutting down trees for lumber.
So that's backbreaking work.
Oh yes, they usually left in the morning and came back at night. And,
how did they hold up?
Well, the best they can, but certain times you have no choice but to do the best you can. Eventually, we got out of there, and we sort of traveled. I remember being at least in 3 or 4 cities. But I suspect is the object at that point was already the feeling in Russia that the tide turned and the Russians were moving forward. So with that in mind, all the Jewish population, or the Jewish people, I think most of them, were trying to get closer to where they came from. Get back to Poland, get out. And let's say, I believe right after the war, in 1945, Stalin declared that all, they didn't call them displaced persons at that time, but all the people that are not Russians that could go back to the place of origin. He permitted them to do that. So obviously we filled out papers where we came from, but my parents did not put down Warsaw, Poland, because they had no intention of going back there. The object of my parents, and possibly some other people, was to get to the western side, to the western controlled, western controlled areas. In other words, who has the American, where the Americans were, the British, the French. And that division was in Berlin. You had 4 sectors, the Russian, American, British, and France. So the object was to get as close to Berlin as possible. So for whatever reason, my parents put down that we came original from a town by the name of Szczecin. And don't ask me how to spell it.
Was it near Berlin?
It was, yes. To the best of my knowledge, from the travels that we took from there, probably was about 50 to 100 miles from Berlin.
Did you take a train or?
No. Well, from Russia, anything in Russia, in order to get anything done, you got to bribe people. You got to pay it. So that had to be done without the Russian authorities knowing about it, how to sneak across to the western side, regardless whether it's British or American or French. And we paid somebody, you know, if there's always people that want to make money. And we wound with a bunch of other people, the same situation. We came by truck, by what they call an army, a 2.5-ton truck, and it was a canvas covered. So the people that were driving it, obviously we had to pay them. There were 2 Russian. One was an officer, I guess, because he had a different uniform, had more medals on than the other guy. And the trip took probably most of the day. We started at night, I think early morning in the dark, and we finally got across to the American sector in the evening, because I remember all the lights were lit up. I can recall, might have been a hotel before. It was a big building and a lot of stairs up there. And that was apparently one of the American headquarters, where they checked in the people.
Where had you found money for the bribe?
We had to work. Some of the jobs in
What kind of jobs? Did you do jobs or did your parents? there?
I did too. I found a wagon and fixed it up, and we collected glass because there were companies set up to recycle that. Okay. So, and they gave me so much a pound or kilo, whatever it was. So that was my job. My dad was working in a lumber place, and I think they were just basically reworking and fixing up, saving, in other words, recycling the wood that they could be used, because the whole town was blown up. You can hardly find a place to sit or live in, you know.
Where did you live?
It was sort of the first floor, but most of the building, as I recall, was all rubbles, you know. But there was one room that was still intact, you know. And usually you made up benches and tables and stuff like that.
And what was your mother doing?
My mother was some kind of a bakery. I don't recall what it was, because all I remember, she brought home every once in a while some cakes and bread and stuff like that. So, and that's how we accumulated the money to pay off the people that were doing that.
So how long were you in that town?
From what I can tell, we probably were only about 6 months, just maybe a few months more, you know, maybe a little longer, just enough to accumulate whatever they were charging. I have no idea what was per head or so on.
So you arrived at the American Army headquarters, and what happened?
Right, and then they took our names and history, whatever they asked for, you know, and that's where most of the names were established, and again, and date of birth and so forth, you know. And they gave us some documents, and after that, we were told that we're going to be settled in a place, you know, and taken in, and we wound up, of all places, Tempelhof Air Base. I don't know if you heard it, the Tempelhof, that was a German camp. And there's still Tempelhof, it's a state, the air base. They use it for private airplanes now. And that was sort of like a barrack type arrangement. There was some building, as I recall, 2 or 3 story high, probably for administrative type or whatever. And we stayed there. We didn't stay too long, maybe 2 or 3 months. And I had my bar mitzvah at Tempelhof Air Base in the basement of some building. And at that time, by some elders and my dad, you know, coached me through the bar mitzvah, pretty much by memory.
Did you have any prayer books or Torahs?
They had some, yeah, at that time.
Who was at your bar mitzvah?
Pardon?
Who was at your bar mitzvah?
Well, I had my immediate family, and my aunt and uncle, and the rest of some strangers. So were all there in the same situation, you know. I don't know if it was a rabbi that did it or not, but he had a beard on, so no way of knowing.
Your family did not have beards?
No, they were clean shaved. After that, well, by the way, during that time, apparently my parents must have celebrated the end of the war, because my brother Jacob was born in Berlin, in Tempelhof Air Base. After that, at that point, they were just trying to get us physically in shape, you know, medically and as well as physically. And they checked us out and so on. And then we were transferred to a more, that was a temporary base, that I recall. And we were transferred to another base that was also a previous army base and was called Greenwald, probably about 100, maybe 50 to 100 miles south of Munich. We stayed there a short time, I don't remember what, but then we were transferred to a bigger one that was called Fohrenwald.
And what were you doing on these bases?
Now, that one was more organized, and it became more organized as time went on. By the time we got there, it was already, they had a structure, they had schools set up. They were all Jewish people, but that was prior to that was an army base, German army base. And the facilities were more brick buildings. So we actually had a unit by ourselves, you know. That was my first experience going to school, structured. By that time I was already 14 or 15.
How did you find it?
Well, hard, but at the same time, well, everything I experienced was sort of new and it was exciting, you know. That schooling was primarily for Hebrew. It's sort of like a hider. And my parents, they also had vocational services set up, schools for my parents and so forth. You know. My dad, I wound up, he took carpentry, but his main job, he was one of the policemen over there at the camp. I don't know all the details what his responsibility was, but it was, mother did not work. She pretty much took care of us, the two kids. We lost contact during the traveling in Russia. We lost contact of my aunt and uncle. We were separated. We did not know what happened to them until we got to Berlin, and actually in Fohrenwald. By that time, they had already a tracking system where some of the people were and so forth. And we found out they went to Israel. Because at that time, they were looking for younger people. As I recall, even they got me into one of the meetings too. I believe the Haggadah was called at that time, one of the groups or organizations from Palestine, trying to get younger people to come over there. After,
not interested in the Haganah?
I think I was too young. I was only 14 or 15, you know. So during that stay at Fohrenwald, that was a displaced person camp. We had the opportunity of applying to come to different countries. See? And most of the people, including my parents, applied to all the countries that are available. I think the object was to get the hell out of Europe, okay, primarily, you know. So.
Was there an option to be in Europe outside of the DP camps? Or
oh yes, you can stay. You can go back to Poland. You can go Germany or wherever, Hungary, but I think very few of them. And what I remember, the adults were talking at that time that some of them that went back were not welcomed, and some of them actually got killed because the anti-Semitism was still there, and probably stronger because the ones that leaned to that direction, were supported and encouraged by the German occupation, So when the Germans left, they still had the hatred. So that didn't change overnight. So I think the majority didn't want to go back where they came from in the first place. And we applied to as many countries as we could because each country had allocations. And I didn't know it at that time, but when I finally came to the United States and years later, I found out that Congress refused to allow so many Jews. They didn't want any more Jews to come into America. See? Found out on the groups that we came in, it was not because it was passed by Congress, but Truman made an exception. He signed the paper for so many thousand outside of Congress approval, because apparently they have the authority to do certain things as president. So I came onto his signature. When we were advised that we were accepted, almost the same week we were advised that the United States accepted us, and the other country was Uruguay. So if the United States would have been a week later, I would have been speaking Spanish now. So I'd be in Uruguay someplace.
Are you glad that you came here?
Well, yes, no question about it. I think everybody in DP camp were hoping to go to the United States, But not everybody got accepted, and as I said, whatever country came first, they usually took it. So that's why the people wound up all over the place.
Was it just a question of numbers, or were they looking for specific traits, like a carpenter or?
No, numbers, to the best of my knowledge. And once we accepted, we left in June 21st, June 13, 1951, from Bremerhaven. We were put on a boat. That particular boat was used for bringing back the troops from Europe with equipment.
Back from where?
From Europe.
To
the United States, American troops, the U.S. troops, right. See? So they put so many displaced people on it. That was my first experience. To me, it looked like a big boat, but compared, you could not walk on a deck without holding onto the. I did well the first 3 or 4 days, and they always told me that if you don't get sick the first 2 or 3 days, you're okay. They're wrong. About the 4th or 5th days, I got it. So about 2 days I was holding over the railing most of the time.
We're going to take a short break
Sure.
and switch the tape.
Okay.